I'm gonna try to do a better job of actually looking at the camera and not looking at my script so much. Hi, welcome to the TRIGUN Maximum Volume 2 review. Before we get started, here's some cowboy art that I did last month. I decided to draw each of the main TRIGUN characters in Western wear just for funsies, and I'm really proud of how it turned out. So if you want to see more of my art or more of my cosplays, check out my Instagram, and if I forget to link it on the video, the link is on my channel. And my spoiler ban still holds for volumes 5 through 14. And that includes everything. Even if you think you're being vague or just hinting at something, I'm very good at putting the pieces together, and I want to remain as unspoiled as possible. I have a comment moderator now, so I have another barrier between me and spoilers, but please do not talk about stuff in future volumes. And I may make predictions and ask questions in my videos, but that doesn't mean that I want those predictions confirmed or my questions answered in the comments. I want to wait until I read the thing itself to find out the answers. So thank you. I don't have my book with me. I had to return it to the library already. So I'm gonna have to figure out what to do with my hands now. Volume 2, Electric Boogaloo. Volume 1 gave me hours of ethical questions to ponder. Volume 2 had me like,
what the hell is even that?
Way too many times. In this volume, we got some excellent character interactions, and that's exactly what I like to see. I don't care so much about the action and the fights. What I really want to see is the themes, the world building, the characters, the interactions between characters, the parallels, the external references to other media and to the Bible. That's what I like to hone in on. The volume opens on a sheriff and a convict outside of some mansion somewhere. The sheriff tells the prisoner that he will possibly get his sentence reduced if he can go into that building and figure out what's going on, because there've been guys that have gone in there like weeks ago and not come out. Then outside the doors of the mansion, we see two members of the Gung-Ho Guns. Mid-Valley the Horn Freak. What a name, dude. I love TRIGUN. And Gray the Nine Lives. So the convict goes and blows up the place with an explosive boomerang. I love TRIGUN. And the sheriff and his men go in to assess the damage. And of course, Mid-Valley and Gray are completely unscathed. Gray quickly does away with the convict, and Mid-Valley saxophones some men to death. I love TRIGUN. Maybe he's just like playing at frequencies that boil your blood, but then how would he survive his own saxophone playing? I'm not gonna question it. I'm just gonna go with it because that's so funny to me. And then another Gung-Ho Guns member drops in, like literally drops in from the sky. And this one is Hopper the Gauntlet, and I gotta tell you, I have no idea what this guy is. Like, I have to assume that he is a human because the only thing that we have in TRIGUN is humans. There's like no aliens or creatures or anything, right? So if it's sentient, it's a human or a plant, and he's not a plant. Like, my brain can't parse what's going on with this character. If you've ever seen one of those images that's like, this is what it looks like when you have a stroke, and there's things that look like objects in there, but you can't tell what they are. That's what my brain does when I look at Hopper the Gauntlet. I don't know whether the limbs are like arms or legs, and there's like a bullet-shaped bowl stuck to the bottom of him. I don't know what is going on here. But when Hopper shows up, we get our first
what the hell is even that
moment of this volume. Legato, who's not here, he is somewhere else in probably a Knives Evil lair or something. So he's doing all of this from a distance. He forces 40 of these men that were here with the sheriff to pack themselves into like a little truck and crush themselves to death. And for what? Like, there's bones crunching and blood gushing out of the seams of the metal. And Legato is laughing maniacally about making Vash suffer. But Vash isn't even here. So what's Legato's problem? That's probably the theme of every single video that I'm gonna make. What's Legato's problem? Like, Vash isn't even here. So is he just committing this crime that Vash might not ever know about simply because he hates that Vash loves humans and so he just wants to kill a bunch of humans? Or is he setting this up so that Vash will come across it at some point? Or Vash will hear about it and be disturbed by it? I don't know. But clearly the range of Legato's powers can extend pretty far. He has no problem manipulating all these men, even without use of his arms or legs. He's like in this coffin thing where only his head is sticking out. I don't know what's going on with him, and I don't think I want to know. Meanwhile, Brad and Sensei are on their way home, and they had wanted Vash to come back to visit, but he has to decline because it would lead the Gung-Ho Guns straight to them and straight to Vash's home. But Vash promises that when it's all over, he will come back to visit. But none of that actually matters because there's a fly buzzing around that is actually a puppet belonging to the puppet master from the previous volume. And this fly has its eyes on Brad and Sensei. And so thanks to this fly and the puppet master, Legato is now able to track Vash and figure out where the people that he loves live. And Legato, this was the king of my
What the hell is even that?
moments. He's stuck in this coffin thing, right, with just his head sticking out. He is hunched over a table that is set with like a fancy dinner, and he is horking down this steak without using his hands, just like an animal. I read this chapter right before bed, and when I woke up, I thought that I had hallucinated the whole thing because it was like so gross and freaky. I thought that I had just dreamed it up. I'm so sensitive to gross food stuff, and so when I have nightmares, there's like often weird food stuff involved. And so I was like genuinely convinced for a minute that I had conjured up that whole thing as a nightmare. Yeah, I don't know what you call it, but like I call it food gore. Like anything with obscene amounts of food or food used in ways it shouldn't be or incredibly unhygienic handling of food, all of that is like the most disgusting thing to me. I was actually watching Spirited Away not that long ago, and I've seen it twice before, but for some reason this time I couldn't watch some of the no-face scenes. I had to step away because it was so nasty to me. So I was trying to figure out why this steak situation was so horrendous to me. And I still don't know why, but here's some of my thoughts. Food is often used as a metaphor in fiction. Not always, but often. I think part of what stunned me so much about the food conversation in Trigun Stampede was that it was actually about food. It wasn't just a metaphor for something else, but it was actually about like keeping yourself fed and healthy even if you feel like you don't deserve it. But anyway, back to Legato's freak incident. What about this scenario and this character makes it so uncomfortable? Because it's not like the Spirited Away scene where it's gross because it's an obscene amount of food. It's like a regular plate of food, right? So it has to be something about the food and the character and the interaction that's happening there. So I was like, what other food scenes have grossed me out before? And I was thinking about the Denethor eating tomatoes scene from The Return of the King, where this guy is like, he's callously eating while he sends his son to his death. And the food there is like a metaphor for the death and the gore that's happening, right? The chicken bones are snapping and the fruit and the tomatoes are like red popping juice. If we kind of take that idea and transpose it onto Legato, it's like he's devouring and killing all of these men because he's gluttonous. The same reason, God, I don't know how to explain this. Killing all those guys and eating the steak is the same. It's excess. It's food and gore. It's contortion, it's body horror, it's animalistic, it's an insatiable, gluttonous appetite. It's giving us straitjacket insane asylum imagery. But now I'm like, oh, okay, like I guess Legato was just eating like that because he wanted to. His telekinesis works perfectly fine. He could have eaten that food without being a freak and gross and disgusting. And what does that tell us about Legato? He's willing to do anything to get what he wants, no matter how abnormal or insane appearing or undignified his behavior is. And his appetites are unquenchable. He's straining like a dog on a leash, choking itself to get to the treat that it wants. Like, why not eat with more decorum or sanity or hygiene? At first I thought that he was restrained or immobilized because he was healing from the damage that knives did to him in Trigun Volume 2. Not Maximum. Trigun Minimum. Shout out to that one guy in my comments that said Trigun Minimum, and I'm using it from now on because I don't know what else to call the first 2 volumes of Trigun. So at first I thought that Legato was in that, like, coffin straitjacket situation because he was recovering from all those crunched bones. But then I was like, wait, bones take like, what, 6 months maximum to heal? It's been 2 years. What is he doing? Is this his idea of fun? So yeah, I can't believe that I spent like 10 minutes talking about this steak scene. Every time I think about Legato or try to describe him or anything, the only word that can come to my mind is freak. He just haunts and vexes me. Truly one of the most awful creatures I've ever encountered. I'm like, hey buddy, do you need an exorcist? I can call a priest. I know a guy. But yeah, all that to tell us that Legato has gotten worse. As he's feasting, if one can call it that, the assembled Gung-Ho Guns enter the room, and no one even wants to talk to him because he's completely out to lunch, if you'll pardon the expression. And they're all like, we're all insane and like killers and stuff, but this is a different level. It really says something when Mid-Valley is like the normalist guy there, and he is the guy that killed people with a saxophone, and his name is Horn Freak. You're telling me this valley is mid? He is like the only one so far that has expressed any sort of misgivings about this whole organization and like what he's supposed to be doing. And he's not afraid to say it. He's like, you are all a bunch of freaks. Legato, you are so unwell and insane, and I'm gonna shoot you in the head right now because you are a threat to humanity and someone needs to stop this. And he's trying to get the other guys on his side. He's, you know, like, what are we doing? This guy we've been hunting, Vash, like, has already gotten rid of 3 of us, and we saw him blow up the moon. And Knives is a similar monster, and Legato is a raving lunatic. And why are these guys telling us what to do when they are not of sound mind? Like, they're going to ruin humanity. We have to protect ourselves. So he puts a gun to Legato's head and then promptly gets, you know, flung around and contorted on the floor. And everyone just kind of watches unaffected. And even though Mid-Valley clearly wants out, he is kind of powerless to do anything about it. After Legato crumples him and tells him off, he seems regretfully resigned to his fate. I'm rooting for him though. Like, I hope he gets out somehow. Whether that's just like a moment of peace or clarity before he inevitably dies, or he is able to go out and go into witness protection and like live a normal life. Or Vash talks to him and offers him a way out and he decides to take it. Who knows? But I'm hoping that something good happens for him. Because I like to see some variety in all the Gung-Ho Guns. They don't all have the same motivation for joining, so they wouldn't all have the same drive to continue. I think it would be narratively very boring to make them all completely irredeemable. I'm not counting Wolfwood in this, by the way. I think it's pretty much a given that he ultimately is not going to side with Knives and the Gung-Ho Guns. Even if he is technically one of them, I don't really consider him one of them. But now that everybody's here for the meeting and everybody's gotten in line, Legato says your job is not to kill Vash, but simply to make him suffer as much as possible. Because Knives wants to teach him a lesson. He wants to break Vash. Knives thinks that Vash simply doesn't understand how evil humanity is. And he wants to, quote, fuse the futility of his purpose into his very bones. And that makes me think that Knives doesn't understand his brother at all. Vash already knows that humans are evil, and he knows that his way of life is futile, and he bears the scars of all of that. But to him, it's still something worth doing. Humanity is still a cause worth fighting for and worth loving and protecting. I think that suffering will hurt Vash, and it might even break him, but it would never turn him over to Knives' side. That rift between them is far too wide. And Legato's pronouncement of this new assignment is given like an edict, like gospel. He says that is his will and it shall be done. His meaning Knives. And that sounds to me like a deliberate echo of the Lord's Prayer, the Pater Noster. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That's the line that it echoes. So that's a chapter and a half. And halfway through the second chapter, we finally catch up with Vash and Wolfwood. And they're trekking through the desert on their motorcycle. Vash is a total passenger princess who can't drive at all. It's silly, goofy fun times. And that means we're about to get a tonal switch up because this is TRIGUN, and so something bad is going to happen because that's how we roll. So Vash and Wolfwood are headed to the nearest empty town. As Wolfwood told us last volume, people have been vanishing. Whole towns were empty with just the word Knives left in the town square. So they're heading to one of those towns now. I imagine more and more are probably popping up because Knives is continuing to be diabolical. As they're riding along, Vash is like, Wolfwood, you never told me how you know about Knives. And Wolfwood is like, whoa, look at that big worm out there. Dude, could you be more suspicious? The worm actually ends up being important because in true Fremen style, Raide the Blade is riding the sandworm towards the town, towards Vash and Wolfwood. So Raide the Blade gets to the town first and stands in the middle of the road to wait for Vash. It's a very samurai movie, it's very spaghetti western. Those genres are brothers. You couldn't really have one without the other. But yeah, Vash seems very, what's the word? Disgruntled? Annoyed? Yeah, he seems kind of annoyed when Raide introduces himself. But he notices that Raide recognizes Wolfwood. That does not slip Vash's attention, that's suspicious. That's weird. Raide tells Wolfwood not to interfere because he wants a one-on-one fight in true spaghetti western fashion. And Vash is like, hey, I didn't agree to this. But Raide is like, I didn't come here to play. He's very uppity. But I guess it's because he's like a samurai type character, and so he has this like code of honor that he's trying to stick to. Wolfwood stays out of it for now. From a short distance away, he watches this match begin, and he thinks that Raide must have lost his mind to bring a katana to a gunfight. But Raide is so confident with his weaponry that Wolfwood assumes there must be something else up his sleeve, so he's kind of hanging back. It's not explicitly said, but I get the feeling that Wolfwood is kind of hanging back to step in later if he needs to. So it turns out there wasn't anything up Raide's sleeve, but there was something up his hakama. And that something was rollerblades. I'm not joking. I love TRIGUN. He comes at Vash like so fast that Vash barely has time to dodge. So I guess the trick to bringing a knife to a gunfight is to be really good with a knife and to have hidden roller skates. Vash just seems like very done with this whole interaction. And Raide says, we have figured out where your home is. And that flips a switch for Vash like immediately. He's not drawn in his usual style anymore, but instead with the Diablo face from the very first volume where his face is sort of like blacked out in shadow and you can just see his eyes like burning. And suddenly it's no more exasperated silliness from Vash. He tells Raide to move and let him go on. And Raide basically says, you can once you kill me, like over my dead body. And Vash is like, I'm not playing. Move. Let me tell you, if he said that to me looking like that, I would be like, understandable, have a nice day. Vash is so scary when he gets scary. That sounds redundant, but you know what I mean. I love that kind of duality in a character where someone that is like capable of such gentleness and kindness can also be so scary and powerful. I'm totally gonna misquote this, but I remember reading something about how to truly be like a meek and humble and gentle person, you must also be someone capable of great power. Otherwise, if you are meek but not powerful, it's just weakness. But true tenderness and humility is found in someone who is also very strong. If I can find the quote, I will put it here because I did a very bad job at explaining it. Anyway, Vash is like, I'm not playing, move. And he seems on the brink of panicking. He is very distressed by this. Vash's rage, I think it's always there, just under the surface. It can be very easily accessed, but never for his own sake. The only way to bring out that fury is if someone, innocent or not, is suffering or is being threatened. But what was more interesting to me than Vash's rage is Wolfwood. We get 2 quick reaction shot panels where he looks aggrieved after Raide says that they've found Vash's home. And I know that Wolfwood must be thinking of his kids at the orphanage. I don't think a first-time reader would know that that's on the line. And I imagine there's a lot like that in this manga that completely recasts itself when you reread it. I haven't finished my first read-through, but I'm already anticipating my second read-through when I can see the complete picture at once and connect all of the dots and do it completely for myself with no audience. As fun as it is to make these videos, it's an inherently different process reading knowing you're going to create something out of it than just reading for your own enjoyment. There's a strangeness, I think, reading something and knowing that you're going to turn it into content. Like there's a layer between myself and the material that prevents me from fully getting lost in it because I have to be so aware of all of my thoughts and feelings as I'm reading it and actually work on putting that into words. It's not like I wouldn't analyze this if I were just reading it on my own. I would still do a very close reading and be picking up on things and thinking about the themes, but there's a huge difference between just ruminating on the story for my own enjoyment and then the sheer amount of metacognition that is required to take that entire experience and turn it into words and prepare it to be received by an audience. Okay, back to the fight. Wolfwood is about to step in and renege on his earlier promise not to interfere. But I wonder why. Maybe because he knows Vash won't kill. And so Wolfwood is just going to step in to do it, to get this over with quicker. Or maybe because he understands Vash's desperation to save his home. But Raide is the one that says, nope, don't interfere. I'm actually not even interested in killing humans anymore. I want to try my hand at killing something that's beyond human. And Wolfwood considers the Gung-Ho Guns, these people that he's known and worked with, and thinks that in exchange for their near superhuman abilities that they gave up their own humanity. But then he checks himself and says, no, they're still human. And it's because they're human that they are able to become so monstrous. And I love that. I am a huge advocate for humanizing evil. Like, there are no monsters, there are only people. And people are capable of doing truly monstrous things. But when we strip away the humanity of a person because of the things that they've done, I think it can cloud our judgment. In some ways, treating humans who do evil things as monsters removes some of the culpability. If you can just write this person off as a monster, they're a monster, that's just what they do. Instead of thinking, this is a person that has done something very evil to another person or to a group of people. If we put monsters into a separate category, it also blinds us from recognizing the evil that every human is capable of. We're not going to be able to see the evil that like regular people perpetrate, because then you think, that's my friend, they couldn't have done that because they're not a monster. This guy that I know would never do such a thing, he's not a monster. And so then it's because of your inability to see monstrous deeds as just human evil. You can't like recognize evil sometimes when it appears in your own life. I hope that this makes sense. Like, it's easy to dehumanize and monsterize someone that you don't know. But if someone you know and love does something horrible, you would be disgusted and maybe even hate them for it. But you would also probably want to speak to them and hold them accountable and hope that they could change or atone. And I think if we can hold that kind of sympathy for the people that we don't know, for the people that we deem monsters, it would go a long way in helping to mitigate evil. And I think even if this person who does monstrous things is determined to be your enemy and it is someone that you must do violence towards, you can still hold that stance. This person is not a monster, they're a person, but I will still hold their humanity in my hands, at the forefront of my mind, even if I must deal with them harshly. I just went way off script. Okay, so Wolfwood is going to try to step into this fight anyway, but Vash stops him again and says, if you're going to kill him, I don't want your help. Because Vash believes that he can help Raide see reason. So the duel resumes, and Vash uses up all 6 of the bullets in his revolver. But then, he has an even bigger gun that's built into his prosthetic arm. So I believe that is the complete TRIGUN trifecta. The revolver, the angel arm, and the prosthetic. And then when Vash's arm gun runs out of bullets also, then Raide moves in for the finishing move. But that was what Vash had predicted he would do, and he disarms him quite easily at close range. With Raide at his mercy, Vash is like, aren't you tired of killing people? Don't you just want to be normal? It is such a blessing to be normal. Why don't you try it sometime? And at this moment, Raide's worldview is crumbling, which it must be pretty weak if it can be defeated by this one interaction. I don't know. But basically, he was convinced that like his school of the sword was the most powerful because he'd been defeating gunmen left and right, and this life that he has lived by the sword is now pulled right out from under him. He does have like a moment of reflection, wondering if he's the one who is wrong, if his path of the sword was not the strongest. But after thinking that, he doubles down, thinking like, no, I've gone through so much training and threw away my humanity for this. I can't abandon this now. And I think that's a theme that we see a lot in TRIGUN, that someone who is like so deep into something that even if part of them wants to stop, that they feel like they cannot because they've done too much evil or sunk too much effort into their ways. They can't change it now. Sunk cost fallacy, right? But what Vash is trying to teach is that it's never too late to change. That no amount of good that you do can atone for the evils that you've done. But good and evil don't just cancel each other out like that. What matters is your willingness to change, to become kinder. And that's the blank ticket philosophy. You are constantly being made new. Every day, every moment is a chance for you to change your course and become better. But instead of reconsidering his ways, Raide picks up his sword again and moves to attack Vash. It's kind of hard to tell from the paneling, but it looks like Raide has a trigger in his sword handle. I don't know if there's a gun in there or if it's like a blade release mechanism. Either way, some kind of ranged weapon, but none of that even matters because Wolfwood shoots him down immediately as he goes for Vash. And it's not just one shot. He shoots Raide down and his sword is like out of reach, but Wolfwood keeps shooting. And Vash is livid. Vash is so distraught that he punches Wolfwood and they get into a fist fight. And Wolfwood throws him to the ground and gives him a very harsh rebuke for being stupid and naive. And if Wolfwood hadn't stepped in, Vash would be dead. And Vash says, you don't know that. You don't. Maybe he would have killed me, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he would have fired at me, maybe he wouldn't. And if he did, I would have dodged or I would have taken the bullet. He says, it's better than killing him and taking away his chance to stop. And Wolfwood accuses him of being a liar. He says Vash says that he wants to save everyone, but it's just a cover for his own cowardice and unwillingness to get his hands dirty. And Wolfwood takes his pistol, the one that he just executed Ride with, shoves it into Vash's hand, pulls it to his forehead, and tells Vash to shoot. He says, if you think I'm wrong, prove to me that you can kill me. Become a devil. I'll die right now if it means that you won't hesitate to kill next time. And Vash says nothing. He just looks at Wolfwood angrily and then sadly. And when Wolfwood sees that Vash won't do it, when he gets no response, he just insults him again and calls him a coward. And Vash says, no, Wolfwood. You're the coward. You give up hope so easily. You are so afraid to trust. You're so afraid to think, what if the worst case scenario doesn't happen? And I don't necessarily participate in fandom, I would say. I have no idea what mainstream thoughts on TRIGUN are, or what other people's thoughts are, aside from like my 2 friends that I talk about TRIGUN with. I don't look up other analyses or opinions. And if I do, it's not until I've made a video or written the essay laying out what I already think. Not that I don't think that there's value in listening to what other people have to say, but I just want to be able to form my own thoughts first before I go looking for someone else to do it for me. So I don't know what kind of thoughts other readers have come to on this scene, but here's what I think. There's no way that Wolfwood could think that Vash would ever pull that trigger, even if part of him wants to. I think he's trying to goad Vash and see what he will do. Vash tells him, Wolfwood, you're so afraid to trust, but I think maybe this is a messed up effort to show trust on Wolfwood's part, putting himself at the mercy of a man who could absolutely destroy him, but would absolutely never do it. Wolfwood thinks that he deserves judgment, and so it hurts to not be given what he thinks he deserves. He sees Vash's power and his skill, and in Wolfwood's life, power and skill are just used to kill. And so in his mind, that's what Vash should do. That's who he should be, but he doesn't, and he isn't, and that can't fit into Wolfwood's framework, and he doesn't know what to do with that. Vash, after his initial outburst and their fist fight, is so gentle with him. He doesn't fight. He doesn't escalate. He doesn't tell Wolfwood off. He doesn't give in to the goading. He just says, Wolfwood, remember when I smiled and you told me that I looked better when I wasn't faking it? If you could see yourself the way that I see you right now, I see a man with a bleeding heart who is forcing himself into the role of a devil. And when writing dialogue and character interactions, especially something as charged as this, generally what's happening on the page is at least 1 degree of separation from what's actually going on with the characters. Like, what we see is Wolfwood is angry at Vash for not killing because he sees it as a risk to Vash's own life and to the people that Vash loves. That's what we see on the surface. But what we don't see is that Wolfwood feels guilty for carrying all this blood on his hands. And he is someone who just gets by telling himself that he had to do it and he had no other choice if he wanted to survive. But Vash's existence challenges that and it freaks him out. And Wolfwood is scared. In this moment, I think he is so scared. He's scared of Vash and scared for Vash and scared of knives and scared for himself and scared for his kids at the orphanage. He's scared to die. He's scared to face what Vash stands for, scared to trust. And in the moment that he shot Ride, he was scared for Vash's life. And for him, being scared is a weakness and it makes him angry. Or maybe it's not that being scared makes him angry. Maybe it's just that he has to mask fear with anger to protect himself. Because if he looks vulnerable, then he is vulnerable and then his own life is in danger. And maybe he just doesn't fully recognize why he's angry and scared. But being angry and scared makes more sense if he's at the other end of a gun. And so he puts Vash's hand there with a gun to make it all make sense to himself. Wolfwood, I think, part of him genuinely likes Vash, even if he doesn't understand him. And so he's willing to put up with Vash's weirdness because he wants to figure Vash out. I think he wants to see where Vash's life philosophy leads him. But he also puts up with Vash because he thinks that Vash is stupid and needs someone to help protect him and needs to learn what the real world is like. But their differences are so extreme that their interactions constantly boil over, and that's mostly because of Wolfwood. Mostly because he cares too much. I think Vash hasn't quite let his guard down around Wolfwood yet, and that's probably normal for him. He has reason not to trust Wolfwood, and even though he is friendly and kind and gentle towards him, when you're 150 years old, getting attached to a human that you could lose in a moment is probably an unwise decision. So I understand why there's so much tension between them all the time. But I can foresee that this tension is going to lead to a place of respect and friendship despite their differences. I think it's really interesting to look at Vash's relationship with the girls and compare that to how he interfaces with Wolfwood. Vash is a lot more emotionally open with the girls. He befriends them very quickly and openly cares about them. But he keeps them closed off from the more serious and dangerous parts of himself and from his own life. And I think it's the opposite with Wolfwood at this moment in time. Wolfwood can see all of these very dangerous parts of Vash, and Vash exhibits his own non-human characteristics in front of Wolfwood, but he does not treat Wolfwood like a friend yet. So meanwhile, back at the ranch, Meryl and Millie continue their vacation. They hitch a ride with a Thomas? I still don't know what the bird creatures, I don't know what they're called. I always read it like Thomas, like the name. And I know that can't be right. I can't help it. My brain keeps doing it. But they hitch a ride with a farmer of the bird creatures. And on their travels, they come across an escape pod with a woman inside. And the woman is calling for help, and she's calling for Vash. We see that she is from his hometown, and that Brad actually helped her escape because Brad and Sensei made it back home and the town is already under attack. Then Wolfwood has a dream that he's back in the orphanage. This was one of the most profound things to me in this volume. Wolfwood has a dream that he's back at the orphanage, reuniting with his little siblings. And they're so happy to see him again, and they want him to come inside to play with them and to hold them, but he can't. He says that he can't, and he looks down at his hands and they're just covered in blood. And then I went back and looked at that whole sequence of panels, and the whole time he's actually hiding his hands, like either behind his back or in his pockets somewhere. And he tells the kids that he's no longer fit to hold them. In doing what he needs to do to protect them, he's severed himself from them. But they don't see it that way. They don't see him as a monster. They just see their big brother and they want to play with him. But he cannot go back to a state of innocence because his hands are so unclean, and he doesn't want that to taint the children. And this is something that Vash and Wolfwood can find common ground on. You know, the heart behind this is no different from the heart behind what Vash does, right? If Wolfwood can sacrifice himself so that these children can live free of harm, he will do it over and over and over again, even though it hurts, even if it's killing his soul. And even though Wolfwood paints himself as this pragmatic killer, he feels the guilt of the things that he's done so keenly. He is not the man that he pretends to be, in more ways than one. Wolfwood then wakes up from his dream very abruptly because Vash crashes the motorcycle. They'd been taking turns driving, and Vash can't drive. And I guess they've been driving for about 6 days, which is a long time to be out in the sun and the heat. Vash just looks completely dead. So they end up hightailing it to the next town and posting up at an inn. Wolfwood just dumping Vash unceremoniously on this couch and then heading off to find a toilet is so me. So while Vash is dead on the futon in the front room, and Wolfwood is taking a dump, the owner of the inn and his son, who I would guess is, I don't know, like 16 or 17. He's not a boy, but he doesn't seem grown yet. The owner and his son have an argument, and the dad is telling the son to stay put while he goes out to confront some people about the boy's mother. And Vash, even in his wiped out state, overhears this conversation. And Wolfwood, later, alone in his room, has been pretty affected by what Vash said to him during their fight. He can't seem to comprehend that Vash does what he does willingly. He wonders to himself if Vash is ignorant of his own skills or if he is just underestimating his opponents. The answer is neither. Vash knows exactly what he's doing, and he knows that insane assassins are out to get him, and he knows that he could kill practically anybody on this planet, but he chooses not to. But Wolfwood says to himself that this is the first time that he's seen someone value other people's lives above their own. And I have to guess that what Wolfwood means by this is like valuing a stranger's life or valuing a bad guy's life. Because we know that there are lives that Wolfwood values above his own. The kids, right? I think maybe what he's so perplexed by is that these are people that Vash doesn't know, and so wouldn't have any reason to value their lives. Back to the innkeeper. He's gone out with a gun to take care of some business and left his son tied up at home so he can't interfere. And Vash, despite being a dried out husk of a man at this point, who can barely walk, unties the boy as the boy explains that his mother was taken by men that the family owes money to, and she's being held for ransom. The son doesn't want his dad to go alone, so he heads out after him, and Vash comes along despite the son's protests. Vash is so exhausted at this point that he is completely nonverbal and only communicating through gestures and hand waves. Maybe that's just for humorous effect. I don't know if I'm reading too much into that. Maybe that's a plant thing. Like, his vocal capacities just shut down when he's exhausted past a certain point. I think it's more interesting to consider the plant explanation. But Vash and the boy come up with a plan while the father confronts the captors. The leader of the captors looks so bizarre. He looks like Crocodile Man. He's like 5 times the size of a regular dude. And I think that the whole like mouth part of this character is actually a faceplate or a mask, because it's the only way that his like body construction makes sense. I do feel like these bizarro villain designs inhibit the story somewhat, like this one and the blobby guy from the previous volume. Because it's so distracting, because they don't look human, I kept having to like backtrack through my own thoughts and stop myself from thinking about this guy as like a swamp-dwelling lizard man, because those do not exist in Trigun. But it's hard not to think of this guy as some sort of creature when he looks like this. So the man's son throws some liquor bottles at the captor, and Vash shoots the bottles, which douses the men in spirits. And the son holds up a lighter as a warning. So the very flammable captors drop their weapons, and the son goes down to go get his mother. But when he hands off the lighter to Vash, they fumble that handoff real badly, and the lighter falls and the whole place blows. The mother, father, son, and Vash make it out okay, and the dad is basically carrying Vash out of there, which I think is very cute. He did not have to help this weird random man like that. But as they come back into town, the townspeople just look at them disturbed. And this aggravates the son, who kind of challenges them and says, none of you were doing anything. How can you judge me for what I did? I was just trying to save my family. Why didn't any of you help? And the dad says, just stop. These people can't afford to gamble their own lives. If it had been someone else's family member, we wouldn't have helped out either. We would have chosen to protect ourselves over someone else. And I don't know how no one noticed he was approaching, given that he's 5 times the size of an average man. But the boss man from earlier barrels in for revenge. But Wolfwood pops in out of nowhere and decimates this guy with the Punisher before he can do any damage. And Wolfwood is like, dude, Vash, what is going on? I thought you were out cold in the motel. How did you get into this insane situation again? And like bonks him on the head with his pistol. But there's something much more sinister about that interaction, because he's not just poking at Vash with the barrel of his gun to like see if he's conscious, which Vash is like 95% unconscious. And also you should never poke at someone or something with a gun, even if it's not loaded. But Wolfwood has his finger on the trigger when his gun is up to Vash's head. And he wonders to himself if Vash is an unkillable monster, like Knives. The Knives thing isn't in the text, but that was the subtext that I was getting. But this sort of confirms my theory that Wolfwood is actually very scared of Vash. And I don't know exactly what the point of this little arc is. I was thinking maybe it's to just further demonstrate the desperate state of the world, or to show how Vash is incapable of leaving someone alone if they're in need, even when he himself can barely stand. Or maybe just to give Wolfwood and his choices a time to shine, because Vash is way too out of it to chastise Wolfwood for killing again. So maybe it just lets Wolfwood have a bit of a break. But then in the next chapter, Wolfwood has a brief flashback to when he was young, and in some sort of combat, I don't know if it's a fight or like a training exercise. I don't know what he was put through when he was young, but it's some situation where he was very close to death, and when he felt that he was truly on death's door was the first time in his life that he knew that he did not want to die. So Vash and Wolfwood have continued on their trek, and they take a cable car across the ocean of sand to reach Vash's home, which is a place that Vash describes as where he truly belongs. That the people there saved him when he was close to death. And I know when he says that, Wolfwood has got to be thinking of whatever flashback we just saw when he himself was near death. And whatever experience he had there, I doubt that someone was there to save him when he was on death's door. He only had himself. Vash was much more fortunate. And Wolfwood asks, how is that even possible, Vash, that you were close to death? And Vash just kind of laughs it off and says, like, what's that supposed to mean? Which I see as just a massive deflection on his part. I think he has an idea of what Wolfwood's getting at and doesn't really want to go into that. But Wolfwood doesn't pursue that line of questioning and instead just goes after Vash's life philosophy again. He says, quote, I can't afford to die. For the sake of the kids, you know? When I sense danger, I don't hesitate to pull the trigger, and then with a prayer, give him 2 shots in the head and 2 in the heart. I can't change the way I live. I don't have time to play till I hit the limit the way you do. I'm only human after all. I'm only human after all. And I think Wolfwood makes a good point here that Vash is more indestructible and immortal than a human. While not entirely indestructible and immortal, he can afford to make and take risks that would be out of the question for a regular person. But, like Wolfwood, Vash also can't afford to die. If Vash dies, Knives wins and humanity is doomed. But Vash does not try to explain or to justify himself to Wolfwood. He actually says he doesn't have all the answers. And it's interesting to me that Wolfwood is the one that's always looking to prove himself right. Even though Wolfwood has the more acceptable and mainstream worldview, he's like so bothered by Vash's very existence as a pacifist that he feels the need to try to convert Vash over. And I don't know, I would think that Vash might be the one that's more insistent on evangelizing his position because it's so radical. But he really only gets into these ideological disputes when Wolfwood either brings it up in an argument or when Wolfwood does something that directly contradicts Vash's request to not kill. And I was so interested to see where this conversation was going to go, how Wolfwood would respond to Vash saying that he doesn't know his own reasons sometimes. But we don't really get any more of that conversation because Vash's home comes into view and Wolfwood sees that it's not a town, it's a ship that's held aloft above the sea of sand by a gravity plant. And he's like really genuinely awed by this thing. As they disembark, Vash is plagued by memories of things that Legato and Knives said that they would do to humanity and to these people specifically that Vash loves. But he shakes it off and moves on and finally enters a part of the ship that has grass and trees and children playing. And he sinks to his knees in relief, greeted and welcomed home by children and adults and old people, all so happy to have him back, asking him if he's back for good, introducing him to the new children that have been born in the 10 years since he's been gone. And Wolfwood is hanging back uncomfortably, but Vash is crying and welcomed in by his home and his family with open arms. And then we get this panel. And this got me. I was feeling such relief, and this puppet thing jump scared me so bad. And then I felt like such a clown because I should have known better because this is TRIGUN and nothing ever goes well. And I just felt like I played myself for like letting myself feel Vash's relief. But it was like such a roller coaster of emotions because I felt this relief and then I felt this shock. Like, what do you mean all their limbs fell off? And then I was like, wait, they're puppets. It's fine. And then I was like, what if they're made out of the bodies of all these people on the ship? But even if they're not, they're replicas of people that Vash knows, which means that each of these real people had to be carefully studied in order to create the replicas. And whether alive or dead, being in the custody of the Gung-Ho Guns is a fate I would wish on no one. I was just like, we're so back, it's so over. We're so back, it's so over. So that was wild. And Gung-Ho Guns number 4, Leonoff the Puppet Master, welcomes Vash to his puppet show. He starts to monologue, but Wolfwood shuts that down real quick by blasting apart Leonoff's favorite puppet. But then Leonoff summons all of the disassembled puppet parts back together to create this giant abomination of puppet limbs. And Vash, he seems to be emitting an aura. Knives, I think we've seen him do the same thing as well, where he just sends out like death vibes and immobilizes everyone within his radius. And Wolfwood for a moment looks genuinely scared, trapped between this giant puppet abomination and Vash, who is crying blood and glowing. If he's not glowing with actual light, then that's like a visual representation of just the sheer power that's emanating off of him. And then Gray the Nine Lives bursts up through the floor right underneath Wolfwood. And the end. The fight continues for much of Volume 3, if memory serves. So I hate to cut it right here, but I'm doing one video per volume. I don't have like a lot to say in closing because this volume ended on such a cliffhanger and doesn't resolve until even into Volume 4. But as usual, I cannot stop thinking about Wolfwood. Trigun Maximum Wolfwood seems to me very different from Wolfwood in Trigun Minimum. And granted, we only had him for 4 chapters in Trigun Minimum, but he seemed like a cheerful man. Now, much of his personality there could have been an act, but I'm inclined to think not, because he didn't even know that Vash was his target during the time that they were interacting. He just seemed so much more innocent at the time. But Trigun Maximum Wolfwood is much more jaded and confrontational, so I imagine he must have been put through a lot at the hands of the Gung-Ho Guns in these past 2 years. I think it's also possible that Naito sensei did not have his full vision for Wolfwood and his role in the story yet when Trigun Minimum was published. Maybe that can account for some of the difference. Maybe it's an extra textual explanation instead of an intertextual explanation. But even though these 2 iterations of Wolfwood are quite different, his kindness has not gone away, or not gone away completely, especially when it comes to children. I think that kindness is still there, it's just buried deeper under a thicker layer of emotional armor. And I want to see that come apart. I want to see Wolfwood crack. I want to see this man cry. Wolfwood is, I think, someone who does feel very deeply, but refuses to acknowledge that. And he doesn't face his inner man head on. And I'm not saying that Vash is the pinnacle of emotional regulation, but at least he isn't afraid to feel the things that he feels and to name them and express them and experience them. He's much more in touch with himself than Wolfwood is, but that's not saying much. Wolfwood just reeks of so much unresolved emotional issues. There's just something in him that he is suppressing that is like desperate to get out. And I just can't wait to see that happen. Oh yeah, Vash didn't collect a coin from Ride. I don't know if that's important or not. But that is all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later, or probably just sometime next month for Volume 3. I don't know what my next video will be. I don't know if I'll do something in between this and the Volume 3 video. But the Attack on Titan finale is airing 2 weeks from the day that I am filming this, and that makes me want to walk off a bridge. So maybe I will make a video about how insane that makes me, because I will be so far from normal when that happens. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. We pop in the biggest bottles when somebody dies. I'm not even joking. I'm considering buying a bottle of champagne to pop open because I have been waiting for centuries for some closure on this. And if you know, then you know. Let me know if you want me to make a video about that, because that'd be fun. But yeah, anyway, thanks for watching. Bye. Every time I say Rite Aid, I feel like I'm saying Rite Aid. Bruh.